So good morning.
Morning, Jeff.
Ready for some more bananas, I hope. Okay, so you would have read about what I was going to talk about, perhaps, and heard. So we've got a new variety trial we planted in October last year. Different varieties which we're screening, looking at for agronomic yield, plant characteristics, and we're doing that for a plant crop and 2 ratoons, and in a 3rd ratoon we'll be looking at it for leaf spot resistance. But this work here is part of the BA 16001 project, improved banana plant protection projects, which have been going for the last 4 years or so. And in this variety component of that project, we have the agronomic work that we're doing here at South Johnston, and we also are screening for TR4 resistance at the Coastal Plains Research Farm in the Northern Territory. The staff from their government department look after that work there. There's also work which has been completed for this project so far in the subtropics that the New South Wales DPI have been doing. They look at race 1 resistance in the subtropics, where ladyfinger is a very important variety down there and is quite susceptible to race 1 of Panama disease in subtropical environments. They also do some agronomic work down there. And as well as that, there's pre-commercialisation trials, on-farm trials, with some of the better varieties that come out of these trials like this, which is essentially a first look at varieties we have imported from overseas. So the other important component leading into this work is we import varieties from overseas plant improvement programs, and so they're usually under some sort of material transfer agreement for us to evaluate, provide them with information as well as for our own industry. If they might be suitable for commercialisation, that's a much later step. We're certainly very interested in the TR4 resistance side of things, but we want to know how they perform agronomically as well here in this environment. We can't do the TR4 screening anywhere other than the Northern Territory at this point in time. That's a more secure site and a long way from most of where bananas are grown. And in the Northern Territory, it's considered to be endemic throughout the Northern Territory, so they can do those trials there as well. So today is an opportunity for you to see some bunches on plant crops, and so that you can relate better to what you'll get to see in Australian bananas, or hear more about at a later stage to do with this trial. You can see what they look like from your perspective and be better able to relate to what you might be reading. So, as I said, the trial was planted in October last year. So we've got 7 rows. The first row here, the first 4 rows were planted as tissue culture. Last 3 rows were planted as sucker and bit material. So most of our new varieties arrive here as tissue culture, so that's what I usually do as a comparison. But there were a couple of the last 3 rows are mostly ladyfinger selections. We were having particular problems with tissue culture orth types in there, well over half the plants in some cases with orth types. So I put tissue culture plants through a planting material nursery and selected only the ones which we were looking for. In this case, there were 4 types. Right, so the timing of this particular trial, we had 4 new hybrids arrived from the French breeding program of Syrahs in the French West Indies. They'd arrived about 3 years or so ago, came out of quarantine the beginning of last year, so we'll get them into the trials and start looking at them. So that was the reason for the trial to start, at least, and we combined it with some dwarf ladyfinger selections and a couple of selections of Cavendish that we'd also had tissue culture orth types with, but that was more to do with the importation phase. And so 2 of them were from the Taiwan Banana Research Institute, who have been developing TR4 resistant varieties for quite some time. One was the Asia Pacific #1, which of the 20 or so plants I had in the previous trial planted in 2018, only one of them was true to type. The others were very, very slow plants and poor bunches by comparison. And we've multiplied from the good plant, and they're looking pretty good in there in terms of true to typeness. And another selection out of the GCTCV 106, which was much more vigorous. So let's take the chance to have a bit of a look through, ask any questions as you go, and when we're finished, we've been harvesting for the last few weeks, but only in the Williams, the GCTCV 106 and High Noon, which is also in this trial. You'll have a chance to taste those later. Hopefully yours is about an hour's riper and be a little bit better. It's just a little bit short. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. The High Noon's quite good. It's ripened a little bit quicker. Okay, let's go through. And the plants that I'll be speaking to have got a pink ribbon on, mainly on the pseudostem. There happens to be a ribbon on that bunch, which is a Williams plant, which we would have finished harvesting the Williams plants on Monday, but I kept a couple of bunches so you can see them. Yeah. So we'll harvest them this afternoon. And yeah, so let's go. So this trial is set up with plots of 7 plants. So in a variety like this, we've got 7 plants. What plant on each end is a guard plant. The middle 5 plants, which will usually have a tag like this, are the sample plants that we collect data from. The other bit of information I haven't told you yet is that to do with that leaf spot screening we're going to do in the 3rd ratoon, we have reference varieties which we compare to the new varieties with known reactions to yellow Sigatoka leaf disease. So we have Williams in the trial already as an industry standard, which acts as a very susceptible to yellow Sigatoka. At the other end of the scale, we have dwarf Ducasse, which is that plot just over there, you'll see marked, which is highly resistant to yellow Sigatoka. In the middle, we're using Pacific Plantain in this trial. There's something with a bit of an intermediate reaction. And, but we won't be screening for disease for a couple of years or more so from now. Okay, so Pacific Plantain, of course, been harvested. In this guard row, we've just got 2 or 3 plants here of Horn Plantain. For those that aren't familiar with that variety, that's what it should look like. That's quite tall, but it is tissue culture in a plant crop. Okay, so we've got Asia Pacific #1 from Taiwan. So it's a dwarf. It's a dwarf plant compared to Williams. At this stage, it looks like the fruit's a bit shorter. I don't have any data setters yet, but a lot more manageable in terms of some of its characteristics it's likely to have compared with some of the other GCTCVs which have gone onto farms so far, which are often a bit taller and more liable to be blown over. We'll see how it goes with the percentage of fruit in different crops in the 20 to 26 centimetre size category. It's probably going to fall a bit short, I expect, but maybe there's a small opportunity for, if this turns out to have good TR4 resistance down the track. And some of this work is really about identifying what is out there, documenting that. Maybe in a couple of years someone will see the opportunity. Maybe the marketplace might even change the requirements for your finger length for bananas, make it more interesting for you. No, sorry.
Does it need to be more interesting?
Yeah, so there it is.
Jeff, have you got these commercially growing on any farm around here?
Not yet.
Is there a problem? Why not?
This is the first step.
All right.
So what sort of...
And we haven't yet proven this true to type one is resistant to TR4. It's looking...
Well, you've got them at Coastal Plains though, haven't you?
Correct, yes. It's, the trial went in there in December last year. Williams are already starting to go down, I understand.
Yeah.
This one is still standing up, but there's no bunches on them yet, so it's very early days. So, my main concern at the moment would be to do with finger length in terms of its immediate roll out into the commodity sort of line of things. But it's an interesting plant.
What is the nutrient rate across all this trial all the same, or
Yes,
what is that?
good question.
Tony?
Not above the environmental standards.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So,
we need to,
and close to that.
yeah.
So we'd be putting on probably 250 or so in the plant crop, maybe up to about 300 in the ratoons.
So in the middle of
and-
what they're doing over there is the nutrient trial sort of thing. So
280 plant 400, is it? Yeah. Return.
Yeah, so
No, yeah.
reasonably
just to
standard.
know how they perform under, like.
Well, it'd be
get pushed
interesting,
along,
but
are they a bit hungry,
We've got
or-
to set on something. And,
Yeah, no.
and first look, we've got these at fairly wide spacings. I've moved the rows out a bit wide in the last trial. We were just encountering too much bunch damage because of leaning varieties we couldn't control. And they're in a single row, better able to see how they can express themselves. A lot of those fine tuning or getting the densities maybe closer for a dwarf variety, who knows. Yes, Frank?
Jeff, what's the pruning like? Faults and
False +1, that's all we're doing.
And if you did 2 or 3, Jeff, you'd see longer fingers there. Like
would you?
Well, there's prospects. You'd certainly get rid of some of the shorter stuff, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you normally like you take an extra and you get longer
Yeah.
top end.
So, there's an opportunity to manipulate it a bit. And, the finger length of this at certain times of the year is going to be much better relatively once you get into the latter part of the year and you've got long fruit, top couple of hands being thrown out as such in terms of meeting the specification. Yeah. But very early on in the data collection, but it's interesting, I think. And stay tuned to how it turns out in the territory as well with the TR4 screen. Behind you we've got some high noon. So this is a hybrid from the breeding program in Honduras, and it's a half sister to Goldfinger that you've probably heard about. So it's a different male parent. Santa Catarina Prata, a sort of semi-dwarf ladyfinger, is the female parent. Now, perhaps come around this side, you can see the bunch a bit better. So, high noon. We've got it in here, I suppose, for a couple of reasons. I've had a variant of it available for a while, which I wanted to compare it. This is the standard, which has usually these hermaphrodite flowers and sometimes bracts and that retained on the stalk below the bunch there. The other one has a clean rachis, but there even seems to be some variation in this plot. So you see that plant there, which is more typical of the other one. Anyway, that's what this one's supposed to be like.
Is that similar to Goldfinger?
It looks like it, doesn't it, Frank? That's
Yeah.
what I thought too.
So there are similarities. It's more susceptible to TR4 than Goldfinger. It's more susceptible to the yellow Sigatoka, but in the opinion from the banana varieties for Market Growth Project from 10 years ago, tastes a lot better than Goldfinger. So you'll have a chance to taste some high noon there, and there's some Cavendish to compare with, and see what you think about it. Let me know. So this variety, I suppose, came to some prominence early on because when I was looking for subtropical race 4 resistance, which affects Cavendish in the subtropics, this variety was one of the few that had resistance to that disease. This had the code GX from the 90s, this particular variety. But in that other project, it's got much better taste than Goldfinger, and the consumer century specialists in that banana variety for Market Growth Project indicated that from what they found that there should be a market opportunity for a banana tasting like that in terms of it's more of an acid profile, but not sour by any means. Much more agreeable would be my comment. And yeah, they saw there was probably an opportunity to increase the sales of bananas overall if you added that into the mix. It's got fairly long fruit. Just how much of an impediment that would be. People seem to still eat a lot of giant Cavendish ones, like giant long bananas, and Cavendish at least.
Seems like most of the flowers drop off too, Jeff.
Yes, that's interesting. So Gavin's picked up on the flower ends, the female pipe there, usually gone from many of the fruit. Quite a lot of hybrids, not all, but quite a lot of hybrids from breeding programs seem to have that feature in the varieties, not all of them. And so that could be useful, but, in a small way. Not a bad thing, I don't think. Okay, let's have a look. Let's go down the row. Yeah. Okay, as I said, we've got 4 hybrids from CIRAD, French West Indies breeding program. So there's a bunch of the CIRAD 02 on here. These varieties have been bred for resistance to leaf disease in particular. They'll have race 1 resistance more than likely. We're still screening some of these varieties against TR4, but some of the earlier hybrids from CIRAD, 3 of the 4 hybrids in the previous trial have shown very good resistance to TR4 in the territory. A lot shorter fruit than Williams. So fairly spindly plant, that one, and they're taller than Williams, and that's often been a problem with the varieties from that program, that they're more prone to wind damage and so forth. It should have good resistance to leaf disease. It hasn't got many leaves left because the leaves break too readily. They're very prone to breakage. You'll see on the stem breaking. Yeah, just a bit fragile. So quite unusual.
That's a tetraploid.
No, so all the hybrids from the CIRAD program are largely triploid, 3 sets of chromosomes like those from that Cavendish Williams has. Whereas the High Noon that we just looked at are tetraploid, 4 sets of chromosomes. The breeding program that the French have done was quite different, totally a new approach 30 years ago, and their end product is typically a triploid. So these are, if you're into that sort of thing, they're AAA, the CIRAD 02 and the CIRAD 01, and the other 2 you'll see are AA-B. So they've got a different type of banana in the mix, which is more like the silk and ladyfinger type in terms of its background. Okay, let's go to the next one. Oh, Williams, sorry. Down this one. Okay, as I said, we're just about cut out of the Williams. I've kept a couple of bunches on for Friday. So that'll be the last of the sample plants for Williams. So again, you can see what a tissue culture plant looked like here in this trial to compare to the other varieties. Okay, so behind you, over there is in amongst you is the GCTCV 106. That leaf has fallen down, it wasn't before. Anyway. Okay, so this particular plant was a selection from the last trial. The plant was much more vigorous than all the other plants, so we had it multiplied. It's got good finger length, probably a bit taller than Williams. This stage, not looking that flash in the territory in the trial against TR4, but sometimes you're trying some things to see. It's the source material originally was supposed to have some resistance to TR4 from Taiwan. The original stuff didn't have much resistance, and neither this does not shaping as though it will either. Okay, and skipping over to the next plot. Here. So this was probably one of the picks, at least of the early ones from the Cerad material. At the Paris International Agriculture Show in February last year in Paris, this variety was released as Pointe d'Or, as the first French organic banana variety. And it's got, you know, very good resistance to leaf disease and quite good flavour. What I've tried some years ago in Guadeloupe, a little bit of an acid start, then sweetens up. It's quite a nice taste. And but again, it's not a big bunch. They're going to cycle fairly quickly. They've got very advanced followers, and this variety's been out on trial in growers' properties in the French West Indies. The tallness is the main drawback for it. They're, you know, more prone to wind losses and that. But they're very keen to innovate, take up an opportunity, but it's trying to get something which ticks all the boxes is proving a bit more difficult. But they've identified that it certainly would be potentially a bit easier to grow organically and has a good taste to go with it. Okay, next one is the last of the Cerad ones. This is Cerad 08. Bunch, I've taken the cover off here. So, second last. Okay, this one and the next one are the a bit of a different flavour background, supposed to at least. More like a silk banana in their taste, and this looks to be particularly vigorous, this one, and good solid plants, standing up with it. And it's also supposed to have TR4 resistance, which is quite interesting, and Bob's been saying that they're looking pretty good up in the territory recently, so, against TR4. So, see how that goes on the taste.
So is that quite, I mean, it looks quite full, but is that...
Yeah, well, we're holding it. Yes.
Yeah, but when we do harvested it, like just last week, or like how many weeks ago would you have harvested it?
I think we would have done it at least this week, yeah.
Yeah, okay, because it's pretty full. Like it's a fat banana.
Yes.
just like, yeah.
Again, with these Cerad ones, we don't really know what they're going to get to either.
Yeah, yeah.
Because of all their requirements.
Jeff,
Yes, Bob?
that's just me.
Come on,
Oh, Frank.
there's a big difference, mate.
You were the one who was swinging your arms around.
Can't you tell?
With the skin, like what characteristics of that banana there, the skin pulp thickness?
I don't know yet.
Right. It just gives me an appearance, you know.
Might be thin skinned.
Well, ripening is it going to have characteristics of splitting and that sort of stuff?
All that ahead of us to find out. Yeah. This is the first bunch that we've revealed in Australia. You're very privileged people. Let's go and look at the next Cerad, the last of the Cerad ones. Cerad 07. Again, a silk type banana. Fairly small bunch, not nearly as vigorous as that last one. Again, they're tall varieties. Also in this lot, we've taken the opportunity to include Formosana, the GCTCV 218 variety. This variety, at least in Australia, is typically shown to be not too bad in plant crops, but a poor returner. And that probably contrary to what's happening in places like the Philippines, at least from what I can gather. But what I wanted to look at in this trial was, is there the poor returning in any way related to coming from tissue culture as a starting point versus sucker bit material? So I've got a couple of plots that have come from tissue culture, so you get a chance to see a bunch here. So plant crop, so much slower than the Williams, but quite big bunches. Nice solid plants. if all bunches and plants of Formosana were like this, it'd be pretty interesting because this variety has, you know, intermediate resistance to TR4. As Stuart was saying earlier, there's nearly 5,000 hectares of this grown commercially in the Philippines, and it's being deployed in other places like Mozambique against TR4. Obviously, in more equatorial climates, close to the equator, Philippines industry is 4 or 5 degrees or so north of the equator. We're 17 degrees south here. There's less, you know, stresses from cold and slower growth periods that might affect it. But they're looking pretty good there. We'll have a look at the sucker material towards the end of the walkout. I'm more interested though in the followers and how they perform in the ratoon. I think, you know, maybe they just don't progress well into the ratoon crop. I don't know what's going on there. Stay tuned.
Jeff, just on
Yes,
the Formosana, is that the original material we had here in Australia, or is it the refined one they're promoting it overseas?
Well, the refined one which they're promoting overseas, which we have in quarantine at the moment, isn't here. So this is as good as what our best starting stuff was. You know, what are we talking?
There was a lot of variation in the
16,
early
17
stuff.
years ago.
There was
Well,
a
there's
lot of-
variation, yeah. And
This is, you
certainly-
got this from Andrew, didn't you, Andrews?
I think, yeah, this material will be from there, but there wasn't a lot of difference, relatively so, for the, you know, the Truda type plants. But, you know, I suppose the experience that we've heard from the likes of Mozambique is Formosana doesn't seem to be able to handle other stresses quite so well. It's just whether or not we can find a management system to iron that out a little bit, make it a bit more resilient, perhaps, how you grow the crop. You know, we're looking for options if we need to go that way. At the moment, you can't even deploy TR4 resistant varieties where the disease has occurred. We're waiting to even get to that point. So this is a preparation time where we're trying to find out what's out there, what's got resistance, what would best fit the bill, and how can we perhaps combine that with crop management strategies to come up with a system to deal with TR4 on a broader scale. Okay. All right, so we'll go across to the next row.
Big trees.
So we've got, so these 3 rows over here are established from sucker and bit material to try and manage the York type problem, which it has done. So we've got 3 different dwarfs and 2 tall types. So this is one of the semi-dwarfs, the Santa Catarina Prada, which we've had in the country for over 30 years. Typical bunch of it. Been out on for trial for quite some time. It seems to be too sensitive to stress during periods of that promote slow filling, such as cooler weather or overcast, wet conditions, waterlogged conditions perhaps. So it can end up filling very, very slowly and much slower than the standard sort of ladyfinger. But it's very resistant to wind damage. Right, Frank? Yes. As Frank found out recently in the blow in beginning of March this year. And we, way back in 1990, during Cyclone Joy, which we had 100k winds here, it was the A variety with bunches still standing. And even got a couple in my backyard, and some of them stood up against Yassi. So they are fairly wind resistant. So that's an interesting thing. Okay. Here we've got a pendulous ladyfinger. See that bunch coming out there? Instead of going out sort of sub-horizontal like many ladyfingers, which is the next plot over, and we'll see it a bit later down here, comes straight down. Well, close, that's what it's aiming for. And so there's a bunch that take the cover off of. So when you compare that to ladyfinger bunch, well, there's one over there you can see. They're typically what we call sub-horizontal, so a little bit lower than the horizontal. Sometimes you can get them a bit better than that. I think there could be an opportunity for a bit more selection. Why that's important is that on the likes of that ladyfinger there, most of the fruit underneath the bunch is curled up, so it doesn't meet the standard market specifications. And I've seen growers, some growers just cut all that off when they're doing bunch trimming early on. And you know, they've got a lot of bunch weight to play with ladyfinger. So that might have some advantages. It's got a bit of a weak point, and that is the leaves seem to be a bit more prone to breakage than the standard ladyfinger. There's one plant there probably worse than the others. You see a few leaves that have just been randomly sort of broken by them. There's one there as well. Just how big a problem that would be in some situations, not determined yet. Okay. So here's a plot of Formosana from sucker and bit material. One bunch out on it. Again, the plant's looking really nice. Very sturdy plant, but much slower than Williams, of course. But you know, realise this is a variety that's got TR4 resistance, and you know, given certain circumstances, can look fairly good and yield very well based on all our plant crop data we've obtained in Australia. Doesn't seem to return so well as I was saying. So let's see if sucker and bit material versus tissue culture makes much difference down in the year or two ahead. Okay, so ladyfinger. Taking the cover off one there, and it's not unusual to see ladyfinger like this. So they'll get a lot taller in return. So we have two other dwarf ladyfinger selections. This one's more dwarf ladyfinger. Got a bunch cover off down here. This one came from a tableland a few years ago. Some growers have been evaluating it up there. In the last trial we had a lot of tissue culture off type. So they're quite sturdy plants. The fruit feels much better than the Santa Catarina Prata in the cooler weather you get. And as I said, we've also got the dwarf Rossi, which is the next plot over. This dwarf Rossi's become fairly popular in some parts of New South Wales. Certainly a lot easier to manage than the tall ladyfingers. But they're very similar, the dwarf ladyfinger it seems, and this dwarf Rossi. I haven't tasted any of this one here on the station, at least for comparison, but I expect it's going to be right. Probably would have had some on one of the farms at least a few years ago down south. But, yeah, it's being grown commercially. Yeah, so that's all. Just whether it's going to meet whatever specifications you have to hand it to. All right, and one last variety to look at here. The other high noon, which didn't have flower, hermaphrodite flower retention on the stalk below the bunch. Again, bunch ready to harvest, and they're good solid plants, but yeah, maybe there's some prospects. We're yet to see. High noon. This is the, there's two. One's the original, this is a bit of a variant, which is a cleaner rachis below the bunch. So, yeah. All right, we've got some fruit over there you can taste. More questions? Happy to hear. Yeah.
The Formosana and like dwarf Cavendish and this one, in terms of TR4 resistance, are they very similar, or?
Formosana has what we use it as our intermediate control. It's got enough resistance, provided you pay attention to inoculant management and, you know, reducing the amount of disease inoculants in the soil before you plant into it. If you've had a diseased plant in Williams planting, and let's say we're overseas somewhere, and you went in with a Formosanna, it'd go down with the disease because there'd be so much disease inoculum, right? So management of that is very important with those varieties that are intermediate in their reaction. The Formosanna is intermediate. The high noon, up until 6 months or so ago, a bit longer, 12 months, we only understood it to be highly susceptible to TR4. But in the first return of the trial completed last year, it was highly resistant like Williams in the plant crop, but in the first return it had an intermediate reaction, which was really interesting. I thought it was really interesting anyway, because here's a variety that the banana varieties market growth program had identified as having a particular taste profile which might be an opportunity in the marketplace.